The Nakba, known in English as the catastrophe, is the 1948 Palestinian exodus, when more than 700,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes during the 1948 Palestinian War. 400 to 600 Palestinian villages were destroyed, as others underwent Hebraization to become present-day Israeli settlements on Palestinian land. Following the Nakba, a series of laws were passed by the first Israeli government to prevent Palestinians who had left from either returning or claiming their property. While some refute these claims, this is known as ethnic cleansing. This continues today as the Israeli government advances in destroying Palestinian homes in order to build settlements to make room for more Israelis, excluding Palestinians. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East estimated that in 1949 there were 736 Palestinian refugees, 736,000 Palestinian refugees. This summer, attention towards the pro-Palestinian movement grew as Israel bombed the Gaza Strip for 11 days. This resulted in 253 Palestinians being killed and 1,900 Palestinians being wounded. While Hamas retaliated with rocket fire, inequality was observed as only 12 Israelis were killed. The country was mostly protected by the US-funded Iron Dome, which destroys missiles that approaches the country. On May 15th of this year, the anniversary of the Nakba, more than 5,000 Montrealers took to the streets of downtown. CUTV covered the event.
I'm here today to commemorate the Nakba that happened in 1948 and continues until this day. From Sheikh Jarrah to Al-Quds to Gaza, our people are united, our people are standing up to fight against Zionism, and that's why we're here today.
Non, c'est une manifestation anti-sioniste, mais pas antisémite. Donc c'est bien je veux vraiment le dire parce que beaucoup ne comprennent pas cette nuance-là. Donc on est là pour l'humanité, pour les enfants qui meurent à Gaza, les bombardements, les familles. On est là pour ça.
Kids in Palestine are running away from our attack. This bombing their homes, running with their toys. If they have time to grab them. 34 kids have been killed so far. Palestine Arabia! Palestine Arabia! Palestine Arabia! Palestine Arabia! من الميل البيان! من الميل البيان! من الميل البيان! من الميل البيان! وإحنا في المخيمات! وإحنا في المخيمات!
Juste faites vos recherches, puis recherchez sur l'histoire de la Palestine et ce qui se passe, puis vous verrez que c'est vraiment inadmissible ce qui se passe. Donc on a vraiment besoin de votre soutien, puis que le Canada se lève, puis que Justin Trudeau revoie ses positions par rapport à ce qui se passe en ce moment.
Among many of the protests held this past summer, some were hosted outside the Israeli consulate in Montreal. Here's what this looked like.
Montréal, Sheikh Jarrah, solidarité! Montréal, Sheikh Jarrah, solidarité! Montréal, Gaza!
Today's event was in front of the Israeli consulate here in Montreal to unite our voices as Jews and as Palestinians to denounce Israeli colonialism and apartheid, obviously to speak out against the brutal Israeli aggression that we're seeing right now in Gaza and the West Bank, all over historic Palestine, and to put pressure on the Canadian government that they need to act.
Il faut parler de l'État d'Israël et du gouvernement Netanyahou. Et il faudrait que le Canada dise à Israël d'arrêter, au nom de l'amitié que le Canada a pour Israël, il faudrait que le Canada dise à son ami Israël que là, notre amitié, elle est en crise. Vous ne pouvez pas faire ça.
What's happening in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah is ethnic cleansing. It's a continuation of Israel's ethnic cleansing project. Israel and settler organizations are forcing Palestinian families out of their homes across Jerusalem during a global pandemic and during the holy month of Ramadan. The ethnic cleansing of Sheikh Jarrah stands as an affront to progressive values all over the world. Population transfer is a war crime and it should be treated as such.
Asma Taye, a 25-year-old woman, a Palestinian woman who's from the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza, she wrote on her Facebook yesterday, she's a Facebook friend of mine, she wrote, "I started to believe that those who died are lucky because they don't have to go through all of this. They aren't expected to be heroes." So just imagine that, a 25-year-old woman, someone who's 25 years old, saying that the dead are the lucky ones because they don't have to be living what's happening right now.
La jeunesse juive se lève partout. Hein? Dans les manifestations qu'on a vues, et hier, il y avait des jeunes juifs comme moi, comme d'autres, qui sont ici, qui ont dit non, ça suffit. Et ce ne sera pas en notre nom que ça se fera. Cette occupation-là, elle a trop duré. Et il faut abattre les murs, construire des ponts, puis le Canada, le Québec et Montréal, comme la ville de Montréal, a un rôle très important à jouer là-dedans. Merci beaucoup.
Canada committed $25 million in humanitarian aid to Palestine while continuing to provide exports to the Israeli military. Since 2015, Canada has exported $57 million worth of weapons to Israel, including $16 million worth in bomb components. The worth of these exports have been increasing each year. A former episode of Local 514 covered how some companies in Montreal are building engines used by the Israeli military. Let's take a look. In the path of Israel's bombing of Gaza, Canada is pledging aid. But at the same time, Canadian exports to Israel are on the rise, and some of the weapons are produced right here in Montreal. Pratt & Whitney Canada, located in Longueuil, have produced PT-6 turbine engines manufactured for various utility aircrafts used by the Israeli Air Force. Most of these engines were not directly exported to Israel, but subcontracted by companies in the United States and one in Italy. In cases such as this, Global Affairs Canada would assess the human rights records of Italy and the United States, and not the countries that are acquiring these aircrafts for their militaries. From 2000 to 2019, Israel has been the top 18th country to receive engines for military use from Pratt & Whitney Canada, as the company provided $42 million worth of engines within this time period. Global Affairs Canada told Local 514 that they cannot comment on specific exports or export applications, and that they have an obligation to protect confidential information considering the commercial activities of individual companies. Kelsey Gallagher, researcher for Ploughshares, says if we included all subcontracted exports to Israel, the number of total military exports to Israel will be much greater than documented by the Government of Canada.
So we don't have an overall estimate. The last record that we have in our own internal database was for the export of 12 PT-6B engines for use in Israeli aircraft. We priced the engines at about $1 million each. So this deal would have increased Canadian military goods by about $12 million. The deal was signed in 2019. We're not sure when the exports actually happened, but $12 million would have effectively really doubled Canadian military exports to Israel for that year, just for this one deal. These companies exist to sell weapons, right? And they're not voluntarily going to not sell to countries. This is why we need strong regulations. We need the Canadian government to step in, regulate this trade, because we were talking about people getting killed, right? We're talking about civilian harm events.
Bell Helicopter Textron Canada, located in Mirabel, an off-island suburb in Montreal, produced the Bell 206 helicopter, which was used by the Israeli military since the 1970s. Last year, the Israeli Air Force decided to replace the Bell 206 with an Italian-made aircraft. In May, Local 514 had a live interview with many involved within the pro-Palestinian movement, including Dennis Colsine from the Canadian Palestinian Foundation of Quebec. I recently spoke with Qasim regarding how recent events have affected the movement and how the pro-Palestinian movement relates to boycotts used to end apartheid in South Africa. Let's take a look. So we last spoke in this past May regarding the bombings in Gaza, Canada's role in the occupation, and press freedoms as well. So much has happened since then, especially in Montreal. You know, we've seen a lot of protests held during the summer, especially in the early summer. You know, since then, protests and online dialogue, they're still happening, but maybe we've seen a little bit of dwindling regarding this topic. Do you think that the bombings in Gaza and activism that followed this have changed the public's general perception on Israel-Palestine?
Well, unfortunately, the activism it's very, it's small, you know, weekend actions when people have some time. So, no, I don't think it had a major impact. I think Israel is providing all the help that we need, because if you recall the 2009 massacre, I've heard war on Gaza, war with Gaza, but it's really a massacre in Gaza. Then there was 2012, which was in comparison smaller. Then there was Protective Edge in 2014, Cast Lead in 2009. 2014 just, it was beyond the pale. I thought you couldn't do any worse, but then it was worse. And more recently this spring. But this spring there was limited. I mean, there was a limited impact. There's only so much Israel can do anymore. People say that the U.S., you know, gives Israel cover. Well, yeah, ish, insofar as, I mean, in the spring, Biden was the newly elected president. Blinken, his foreign affairs minister, secretary of defense. And there was only so much, you know, support. The mantra, Israel has a right to defend itself, you don't hear it as much. And I'm sure in private, Israel, I'm quite sure that in private, Israel, or the prime minister of Israel, in this case, it was Netanyahu, at the end, was getting calls saying, we're getting, you know, here in the US, we're getting a lot of pressure in the UN, at the United Nations. Stop this. They even bombed I think it was the Associated Press building. Now, that's crossing a red line. That is just, you know, enough already. So I don't think the U.S. is giving Israel that much support. It is giving its support, but less than in the past. Now what we've seen more recently is, and this is very recent, this is just off the press, there are 6 human rights organizations, Palestinian human rights organizations, I believe some of them are in Israel, that have been deemed by Israel, by the state, as terrorist organizations. Now, this has a familiar sound to it. Why? Why do I say that? Well, South Africa was an apartheid state, obviously, and deemed, you know, the ANC a terrorist organization. It deemed Steve Biko's movement, Black Consciousness, a terrorist organization. Youth groups, terrorist. Everything was terrorist. Okay, so when you know, an apartheid country says you're a terrorist, it's almost a badge of honor. So your question was about the recent developments, right? And the recent activism. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I lost track. The recent activism is good. It's great. The youth is behind this. This is wonderful. How much of an impact does it have? Probably, some impact, but mainly Israel is. People have lost support. They don't buy into Israel is a defenseless, David against a huge menacing Goliath. They don't buy it anymore. As a on a personal level, I gave a talk last week in CEGEP. I was invited by a professor there, excuse me, to talk about Israel Palestine. So 1 week it's me. The next week it's some fellow who's Jewish. That's fine, but he's advocating for the Zionist. I think he's a liberal Zionist, so he's advocating for that. And I think he's coming in Wednesday. I spoke there last Wednesday. And the kids there so we're talking about 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. And I talked to them about the Human Rights Watch report, B'Tselem report. And by the end, I mean, and I'm not saying this, for promotional issue. I'm not saying this out of self-promotion. I'm saying that the message, they applauded me. I don't think it's a personal thing. I think they were applauding the message. They were saying, we agree with you. And the fellow who's following me this year is going to talk about Israel being, a victim being attacked by Hamas. He's going to talk about Hamas, how Hamas is a threat for Israel. I don't know. I won't be there to bear witness on how he'll be received, but I think he's going to have a hard time. And it's not because I'm so good at presenting the case. It's not about me. It's not about the messenger. It's about the message. And in his case, his message, I think, will be very, very coldly received.
Thank you, Dennis. Regarding how you mentioned earlier about the 6 leading Palestinian human rights groups being designated as terrorist organizations, do you think that this is a move to, discredit these movements and also rebrand it as terrorism, especially, following waves of pro-Palestinian support we've seen in recent months?
Well, my take on that, Savannah, is that if you're an apartheid state, you don't want human rights organizations on the ground monitoring your apartheid, policies, regime. So I think it's a sign of great weakness because you have nothing better. All you can do is, it's the might makes right argument. They're not saying, well, this is this discourse, this human rights discourse for monitoring is inaccurate or false. They're saying enough with this human rights BS. The only way for these organizations to not be branded terroristic by Israel is to do Israel's bidding and to basically become sort of what King Buthelezi in South Africa became. He became a collaborator with the regime, the Zulu King Buthelezi. There were other collaborators. There were snitches. We have the same thing in Palestine. We have the PA, that's the Palestinian Authority. I call it the CPA, the Collaboration Palestinian Authority, because what they do is they attend meetings, they negotiate, but all the negotiation, what the negotiation is about, is buying time, because while the negotiations go on, they build settlements. I read, was it yesterday, that Israel announced, I think it was 1,355 units, an expansion of settlements of considerable expansion. Of course, you don't want human rights organizations monitoring that. So it's easier to outlaw these Palestinian organizations than it is to outlaw Israeli organizations. B'Tselem is the leading human rights association organization in Israel. You can't really, outlaw that, because then you don't come across as democratic. And Israel's identity, self-proclaimed, It's a Jewish democratic state. So if you're a democratic state, you have to have human rights organizations, you have to have NGOs, you have to have that sort of thing. Now, the fellow that heads the B'Tselem, his name is Haggai El-Ad. Some have mentioned that his days are numbered. He presides over an organization that represents, and in the view of some, an existential threat to Israel. That's human rights. So that's my take on the 6 organizations outlawed in Israel. By Israel.
Let me know if you feel comfortable answering this, but what is it like as a Palestinian who's grown up around coverage demonizing and invalidating the movement and Palestinian lives in general, and as well just kind of seeing that shift this past summer towards people actually validating the movement and more kind of general public knowledge being shared on this?
Well, the word that comes to mind is empowerment. And to make a connection with the First Nations in Canada, people are all of a sudden realizing, okay, we have a colonial past. We have residential schools. We have the remains of children. We have a lot of literally skeletons in our closet, and now people are waking up to this reality and thinking, okay, I'm gonna wear an orange T-shirt on Canada Day. This is not a day to celebrate. August 1st, starting this year in 2021, August 1st is now Emancipation Day. I don't know if you're familiar with this new holiday. So it's emancipation with respect to slavery in the British Empire. So we celebrate the emancipation of enslaved peoples in I think it was 1840-ish. I'm not sure, 1838, something like that. So we celebrate that. However, I have no inclination to celebrate on August 1st. Because at the same time as we say we celebrate the emancipation from slavery, we give, and I'll quote Marc Garneau here, the global affairs minister, formerly foreign affairs minister. He's saying that the apartheid label does not stick. This is more or less verbatim quote. The apartheid label does not stick to Israel. So we give our diplomatic support to a racist regime, an apartheid regime. Apartheid is a crime against humanity. It's more odious than war crimes. This is the most odious of crimes, a crime against humanity. So Canada gives its diplomatic support to a regime which is informed by racism. At the same time, we celebrate emancipation from slavery and racism, which was slavery, of course, was informed by racism. So that's talking out of both sides of your mouth. Okay, so I don't feel like celebrating on August 1st, and a lot of people are feeling the same way. We feel empowered. Israel, Palestine, yeah. As a Palestinian, the tide has turned. The genie is out of the bottle. And there's no way Israel is going to be able to put it back, control the narrative. That's done. That's over. Israel can, pound, on the table that this is a democracy. It's an apartheid state. There's no getting around that, and people know it. So yeah, I feel as a Palestinian, a diaspora Palestinian, I feel very empowered. I know that the house is still standing. I know the gates are guarded by the US empire, but I know that from within, the house is rotting. The wood is rotting. The foundation is cracking on all sides. It's only a question of time.
Thank you so much. To kind of build on that, does it seem, I guess, ironic or ridiculous that, following the bombings in Gaza, Canada pledged $25 million to help rebuild Gaza. Meanwhile, at the same time, I was just trying to quickly search for the numbers here, but I don't have exact numbers, but, Canada is giving millions upon millions of dollars towards military weapon exports to Israel. And, each year this is actually increasing. It's a bit, do you think it's a bit backwards?
And we buy Elbit systems, weapon systems from Israel. So yeah, no, it's perfectly incoherent. And 25 million for the needs of Gaza, it's almost like giving somebody who has a heart attack, here, have a Band-Aid. Take the Band-Aid. This can help. Sure, it can help, but really, are you serious? Is Canada serious? This is an embarrassment. I was a CEGEP and university student in the mid-'80s, early '90s, and at that time, apartheid in South Africa. This was the struggle of my generation. And to give, Black South Africans struggling against apartheid, to give them, I don't know, whatever, 25 million or whatever it is to help rebuild, after the Sharpeville massacre or the students' uprising in, I think it was in '77. To give these victims of the apartheid regime a Band-Aid. I mean, it's a slap in the face. Canada, are you serious? Now, what would be coherent is for Canada to say, like it did in 1985, under Mulroney, and due to the pressure of activists, Canada was very happy doing business with South Africa, much like the US and the UK. The US under Reagan, the UK under Thatcher. Mulroney in Canada. Canada was delighted to do business with South Africa. But the pressure by activists forced the hand of Brian Mulroney, the Mulroney government. And in 1985, Canada announced sanctions on South Africa. Now, it's not a permanent thing, it's a temporary thing until South Africa lifts, the apartheid regime. Now, that would be the appropriate response in this instance. However, I think this time around, Canada is not going to do the right thing. I think what's happening now, I've read by Omar Shakir. He's the Human Rights Watch. He's the fellow who authored the report by Human Rights Watch. So he wrote a piece, I believe it was him, saying that Canada is one of the few countries in the world actively saying this is not apartheid. Other countries are basically saying nothing. Others are saying it is, the Human Rights Watch report is accurate. But Canada is actively saying it's not accurate. Apartheid doesn't stick. This is a democracy. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. This is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Global Affairs, in the Trudeau government. So yeah, Canada is really the US and the UK under Thatcher and Reagan. And these people, Thatcher and Reagan, supported the apartheid regime till the very end, as did Israel, by the way. Mandela was on a US sort of no-fly list, terrorist list, until 2008. He had retired as president of South Africa. By this time, he was, a world, icon, not to mention a Nobel Peace Prize winner, laureate. And he was still on a terrorist list in the US until 2008, 5 years before dying. I believe he passed away at 95. So until age 90, he was on some terrorist list in the US. So it just goes to show the power of inertia, political inertia in the US. And I think it's the case for Canada. This time around, Canada will not be on the right side of history, I'm afraid.
Dennis referenced a few times the importance of involving youth in this movement. I spoke with Kamel, an organizer and member of Canada Sanctions Israel, a group which hosts demonstrations almost every Saturday in order to put pressure on the Canadian government to apply sanctions on Israel. Canada Sanctions Israel involves many Palestinian youth who are aiming to free Palestine within our lifetimes. Kamel spoke about this and how this can be achieved.
So back in early May, when the events started happening in Jerusalem and when the events erupted in Gaza, some sort of small protests started happening, and a group of us felt like we needed more of a goal towards these protests, more of something that would unite us, or like a bigger objective, you know. So we decided that this is something that we want to do, Canada Sanction Israel. So the roots basically started just a group of guys and girls, or young Palestinians and non-Palestinians, just trying to get the voices of Palestinians out. So we started organizing and getting more volunteers, more people joining us. And it started growing, you know, hopefully to make an impact. Basically, and our goal is basically to spread awareness and to educate, and eventually to sanction Israel, hopefully.
Thank you. So I'm sure that you've been involved in pro-Palestinian activism for a while. You know, have you noticed a difference in the atmosphere around pro-Palestinian organizing and protests in general since the bombing in May, and just, you know, more attention, I guess, online and in person being drawn to Israel-Palestine?
Massively, I would say so, yes. So previously, basically, I'm gonna go at it from my own point of view as someone who was born and raised in Gaza. I only came to Canada about 2 years ago. So since I came to Canada until the events that transpired, there were many times where the topic of Palestine and Israel popped up, where while I was there, or a Zionist or a pro-Palestinian Jewish person was there, mostly at work, because these kind of things happened a lot. This was a huge taboo to speak about. It was something that you do not want to mention Palestine, you do not want to mention Israel. So it was more of a, you know, conservatively shyly defending Palestine. The May events showed a huge difference. The narrative previously talked about a complex issue, you know, a complex situation. Oh, it's too complex of a history, which is a huge lie. So as soon as this narrative broke up, as soon as the events transpired and the narrative broke up, you're able to see them for what they are. You're able to see the struggle eventually for an aggressor against a marginalized group of people. You're able to see an occupier and an occupied nation. You're able to see the international law not being upheld. You're able to see these lines clearly. It's not a taboo to speak about it anymore. So once you're at the university right now, if you talk about Palestine and a Zionist kid comes in and says, oh, I feel threatened when you talk about Palestine, you can tell them bullshit, sorry for the language, but you can call their bullshit right in their face, which is amazing, because right now the atmosphere is shifting from, no, it's okay, it's, you know, yeah, I don't have a strong opinion, into, okay, I want to listen. Tell me what you want to say about it. And you know, maybe it's right now on the first step, it's not directly a direct hit, a direct impact, but on the long run, it is a huge impact, especially in Canada. If you look at the US, the US previously, like way back in the day, it was prohibited to talk about Palestine. But with the rise of the Palestinians and the pro-Palestinian activists in the US, they managed to rally. Of course, it's not precisely what Palestinians actually are aspiring towards, but they managed to rally enough to create or to support and have a huge support and a huge share in a party where people talk about them. Someone like Bernie Sanders, someone, maybe it's not to the extent that we want, like the progressives in America, but it started happening in Canada. And I believe eventually this kind of change towards a positive environment in Canada is possible, but through more and more awareness.
I guess like thinking of where we are right now with mobilizing in the movement, what needs what needs to go further in order to actually continue to generate change and continue to involve people within the movement to finally liberate Palestine?
I think hopefully, inshallah, I think there are two major challenges that we're facing, which is honestly organizing and rallying people. So until, I'm not ashamed of saying this, until a very long time, if you see, not just in Montreal, there is also a lot of movements that got out in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Quebec City, everywhere. So I think the major challenge that we have is how we could connect among each other, and how can we create a body that is more of an extension to Palestine more than about the person himself. It's not about Kamel, it's not about Bayan or Sabine or Muhammad or Ahmad. It's about the movement and Palestine beyond those people being gone. So the kind of organization that we need to have is creating awareness among the people, to have them interested enough just in saving a little bit of time towards Palestine. Find a Palestinian organization, find the Palestinian grocery store to buy from, do the minimalist things like supporting small things. But as a Palestinian organization to grow, we need to organize among each other. We need to rally people around us. Unfortunately, people get more occupied with their current life, what's going on in their own life. They still can post, they still can share, they still can do this stuff. This is very important, because we found out that social media is a huge weapon that was used against Israel in the past war. So Israel, basically in the last war, the sheer atrocities of the things that they've done made the people flip against them. Even the people who were on the verge or pro-Israel are now questioning it. So the things that we need to face are organizing and rallying people around us. I think social media plays a huge factor. If you're able to join a pro-Palestinian organization, or if you're able to assist in any kind of way, you don't have to donate, you don't have to do anything, but try to push towards that way. If you have family members around you, if you have people who do not know much about the cause, it's better to speak a little bit about it. It's better to open up. We have a lot of stories of people who sharing their stories, who just joined us where they were on the edge about Palestine, and they started organizing with us. And it's amazing how much people you see that are like basically less than 50% of the team is Palestinians. So if you can rally around Palestinian people, if you can rally around Palestinian organizations and stores, support Palestinian ideas, I think that would actually get us to a point where we can influence something. And most importantly, vote Palestine whenever you can vote Palestine. We know that we do not recommend parties, we do not support parties, but when you're able to push the people around you to have Palestine on the agenda, it's very important, because Canada sanctioned Israel wants to shift the role from mainstream social media of, oh, the bombing stopped, we can rest now, into a new level where we can feel the pain of a mom sending her kid to bring bread and not coming back. a pain of a martyr, a pain of a mother aching her kids who lost their homes, a pain of Muhammad al-Durra, the kid who died in between the arms of his dad, Iman Hijju, who died as a kid. We want to connect to those people, to their pain. We want to make sure their voices are heard. So when the loud violence, the bombs stop bombing over Gaza, don't forget that the same thing is still going on. Don't forget that Sheikh Jarrah and Beta and the Islamic graveyards are now being demolished as well for the sake of building a biblical garden. These things are ongoing violence. It's silent violence, and everybody is not talking about it. If we can keep sharing these kind of stuff, it would create a huge impact. Especially if you look at the last case of the hunger strike prisoners like Al-Ghadamfar. He managed to be pushed out of the administrative detention. That's what we want to do. We just want to keep going. I know it's not easy to keep it tight, especially people have their own things to do here in Canada. They have their own responsibility, but we just need to rally as much as possible. At least go once a week. We make protests once a week or banner drops. At least go to one of those, because the kind of things that we aim to do, all the movements, they change the type of things that they do. We did the musical event last Saturday that rallied about 9 musicians for Indigenous people, Black Lives Matter for us Palestinians. The unity of minorities, there was someone from Mohawk Traditional Council who said this: the unity of minority is what defines us as people, because all of those are colonizers. If you look at the history of Canada, and its current support to Israel, if you look at Israel's history, what they did in Guatemala, these things connect to each other. So this is also a huge factor, how we unite ourselves as small communities between the indigenous communities, how to organize between the Palestinians, the neglected communities, the Black Lives Matter, the people who actually deserve a change for once.
So I know that one of the large goals of Canada sanctioned Israel is, to have Canada sanction Israel. If Canada were to do this, what would this mean? And what would this would this set a standard for the international community?
So this would be a precedent, but it's not much of a precedent, It's supposed to be easy to judge an apartheid system by its actions. Canada sanctions Israel's major goal is to go there, but the process that we do it through is raising awareness, and that's by each and every means possible, whether through music, through dabka, through dancing, through just engaging with people, small talks, any means possible to tell you about Palestine. I can tell you, I've been in Canada for 3 years. I've been involved in this kind of Palestinian movement for almost 3 years. For the past year, I would say. Before that, in each and every time I sit around people that I know, I like to speak about Palestine because it's my passion. I have nothing else to do in my life. I love Palestine. I was born there. I was raised there. It's part of who I am, my identity. I don't deny that I'm Canadian. I'm proud to be able to be here in Canada to achieve the things that I want to achieve, but I came here with my ability. Nobody told me, here you go. So eventually what we want to do is to show Canada as a precedent. If you see what happened in South Africa, the sanctions and the political and the diplomatic movement led to the existence of confirmation of our acknowledgement of an apartheid state. So it led to some sort of a solution to the South African people, to the natives, to the people who were already there. This is what we're aspiring to. So I know it's not logical, and I know it's not, I'm not gonna go ahead and say, okay, Canada will sanction Israel next year or the year. Canada and US are one of the biggest supporters of Israel. But there's no harm in dreaming that on the long run, you can achieve enough change where you get to a point that you can flip the equation. It will be a precedent. I don't think it's very logical or crucial to speak about it right now, because it's a very long run objective. I'm very much hopeful that it will happen. But I think it will take a lot of awareness raising. It will take a lot of organization. It will take of each and every one who's whether if you're a Palestinian or a non-Palestinian, if you are pro-Palestinian, the main thing that you want to put in your mind, in your head, towards your eyes is Palestine. That's it. Put your egos aside, put your work aside, put everything aside. Maintain your life schedule, maintain what you're doing, but just make sure to put Palestine towards your eyes. That's how we can make change. That's how we can sanction. If Canada starts by sanctioning, I don't think other countries would find it hard to sanction, because Canada likes to think of themselves as a beacon of freedom. No, the toughest thing that this government has done is feel sorry and apologize for the thousands of indigenous children that were murdered in the residential schools, and feel sorry or actually ask the Palestinians and the Israeli occupation forces to calm things down. I mean, how can you? If you look at these things, it's not realistic that Canada will sanction Israel tomorrow, but that on the long run, with how much the atmosphere is shifting. I mean, our biggest supporters that used to come are Orthodox Jews from Natural Karta, are my dear friend Rabbi Yoel Sami. He came with his wife. His wife was with him. He used to come to all of our protests, and his wife was with him. His wife said, "My grandma was born on her ID, was born in Palestine. We will go back to Palestine as Palestinians." She's a Jew. So if you look at all these minorities, if we unite ourselves, we raise awareness, we will sanction Israel. We will get to a point where we get to a solution. It's not realistic that there's a lot of things that are not realistic in maybe the things that we say, but we do believe in them wholeheartedly. And we know that we will get to a solution, because there's no way if you look at all examples of history, there was no injustice that lasted. If you look at Germany, it fell down. If you look at Spain, it fell down. UK, it fell down. Russia, Soviet Union, great kingdoms fall down. Everything that was based on injustice will fall down. So yeah, we're here to stay and forever.
The terminology used towards Israel-Palestine has long been debated, including terms such as genocide, ethnic cleansing, and colonialism. Local 514 video journalist Aude Simon spoke with Aaron Lakoff from Independent Jewish Voices to discuss this and Zionism. Here's what he had to say.
A really old kind of play in the playbook of pro-Israel organizations is to basically accuse anyone that's standing up in solidarity with Palestinians of anti-Semitism simply for questioning the state of Israel. And on that point, we have to be very clear. There's a huge difference between criticizing a government or a state for their flagrant abuses of human rights, and then of course criticizing a people, whether it be Jewish people or Black folks or indigenous folks, and people always have to make those distinctions between people and governments. Now, one thing that I think is really important to say is that, especially this past summer or spring rather, during the Israeli bombing campaign in Gaza, we saw massive movements of people in Canada coming out to support Palestinians and to call for an end to the violence in Gaza. So huge demonstrations, again, in every Canadian city, tens of thousands of people coming out. Now, there were a few isolated incidents of anti-Semitism that we saw, but I think it's really important to say that those few isolated incidents that we saw don't speak for that mass movement of people, right? Because it was just so clear going out that people weren't coming out out of a hatred of Jews. They were coming out of a love for the Palestinian people. And those two things aren't in any way oppositional to one or the other. And we at Independent Jewish Voices definitely feel that you can absolutely, fight anti-Semitism or denounce anti-Semitism and stand for the liberation of Palestine at the same time. They don't cancel each other out. And what we're always trying to say is that freedom isn't a zero-sum game, so that when we're calling for freedom for the Palestinian people, it doesn't mean an unfreedom for Jewish people in any way. And so, I think that we always need to kind of keep both of those things in mind. And I do think that we need to denounce actual anti-Semitism where it does exist, right? But what pro-Israel organizations do, and it's an incredible disservice to the Jewish people, is that they're always trying to confuse these perceptions in the public mind. So right now they're very much trying to say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, which is absolutely absurd, because anti-Zionism or Zionism as well are ideologies, whereas Jewish people are a people. So ideologies are always up for debate, whether it's socialism, communism, fascism, liberalism, or Zionism. We should always be able to freely and openly debate these ideas. That doesn't mean that you're against a particular kind of people for doing so. In the case of Israel, if you call Israel a racist state, or if you question the foundations of that state, or if you question Zionism, you'll get labeled as an anti-Semite, and that is very, very problematic. Canary Mission is a disturbing smear campaign, well-financed online campaign that we've seen crop up in the last few years. It's not the first of its kind. There have been other websites like that have existed in the past. And their goal is simply to dox, so that is to, reveal oftentimes private information publicly, to smear and to intimidate supporters of the Palestinian cause. So more often than not, it's racialized people who end up on Canary Mission, people who are Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, or of other races, or a lot of Jews who are, like members of Independent Jewish Voices, and I would say we proudly have a lot of people on Canary Mission. Jews who stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. What I will say about Canary Mission that's really unfortunate is that, as you said, it oftentimes is a really scary thing for people who end up on that website, because a lot of these people, the activism that they're doing is completely legitimate. If you look on Canary Mission, and if you look on the profiles and the quote unquote research they're doing on these people, a lot of the times it's just for being involved in boycott campaigns against the state of Israel. Again, nothing that has to do with actual anti-Semitism, but just speaking out against Zionism or against ethnic cleansing or against Israeli apartheid. And so you end up on this website, and when there is a threat that you could lose your job, or that you could be alienated from friends and family, or possibly, face sanctions in whatever academic institution that you're in, I think the intention is that people are going to be scared away from doing this kind of activism. And we've always seen people in power use scare tactics to try to stop social justice movements. The police use scare tactics all the time, overtly using violence against demonstrators in order to try to scare demonstrators from coming out to support social justice movements. Governments use scare tactics, including, incarceration, criminalizing protest movements so that people, again, are afraid to use their voices or to lift their voices for the causes that they feel are fundamentally important. But I think what's really important is that, we not be scared off by these kinds of websites. And so what I always try to do, we talk to a lot of people who end up on Canary Mission, again, for reasons that have nothing to do with anti-Semitism, but that are very, very legitimate in our eyes. So, boycotting the state of Israel. And sometimes in a few cases, we try to offer guidance to these people. And I think what I'm always trying to tell, especially younger activists, is to not be afraid, right? Like, we have to, of course, we have to be engaged in these movements in genuine intersectional ways. When I say intersectional, I mean we have to fight anti-Semitism with the same amount of force and energy that we're fighting for all the other causes that we believe in. But we have to do so in a way that is unapologetic and unafraid. And so, sometimes that will mean threats, and sometimes it will mean doxing. And I know that for many people, these are very serious things, especially, for women and racialized folks. Oftentimes, those threats can come with real life violence, or all sorts of extremely scary and menacing things. But I think the more we come together and the more that we grow our movements, it'll be harder for these trolls like Canary Mission, and that's all they are. They're internet trolls. It's going to be harder for them to delegitimize our movements the more that we get more public support on our side. And so that's what I really think we need to do. Is I think we need to build up enough of a united front within the public eye and within public opinion, so that when these far right groups or these ultra Zionist groups like Canary Mission come at us and try to dox us, and they'll say, you bad people, you anti-Semites who are calling for a boycott of the state of Israel, we can say, look, the vast majority of Canadian society agrees with us. Perception in Canada has shifted, and these shifts happen over time, right? Nothing really tends to happen overnight, but I've been involved in Palestine solidarity work for over 15 years now. And so I, even in those 15 years, I've seen a lot of different shifts. Israel typically carries out bombings like we saw this past summer. They're happening about every 5 years now. So there's a major attack in 2009, another one in 2016, and then this past one in 2021. And every time we see one of these attacks, we're seeing larger and larger amounts of people and huge sectors of Canadian civil society and the Canadian population coming out in solidarity with Gaza and in solidarity with Palestine. Now, what changed this year, I think I can talk about it from a couple different perspectives. I mean, first of all, just with regards to independent Jewish voices, we saw a huge spike in interest and a huge spike in membership after the attacks happened. And so that's really exciting to see that, especially younger Jews in Canada are absolutely refusing to allow these atrocities to be carried out in our names. We just reject these notions that it should be acceptable for Israel to continue its military occupation of the Palestinian territories or to be able to carry out its apartheid regime. So that's a really exciting thing, is the growing interest amongst Jewish people and especially amongst younger Jewish people to be involved in Palestine solidarity. And then another major shift that I would say we've seen is we're just hearing Palestinian perspectives in the mainstream media way more these days. And so it used to be, if we go back 10 or 15 years, that Palestinian voices would be considered marginal or even extreme. Oftentimes they would just, people who had very legitimate positions would get labeled as terrorists or terrorist sympathizers. And now, flash forward to 2021, we're hearing from Palestinians on the nightly news and on, major, cross Canada programs like CBC's The Current. We're hearing from people like Diana Buttu, who's a really well-known Palestinian lawyer and human rights activist. So I think that has caused a real shift, because when you start to hear directly from Palestinians and when their voices aren't censored and actually heard in mainstream media, all of a sudden those positions they hold start to become much more acceptable within mainstream public perception, and it really starts to shift the discourse. And so, there was an opinion poll done in 2020, so last year, and what we're starting to see with the Canadian public, because we have data on this now, is that the vast majority of Canadians do not believe that calling for boycotts of the state of Israel is anti-Semitic. 80% of Canadians don't believe the calling for boycotts of Israel is anti-Semitic. Now you contrast that to the official government position and to Justin Trudeau's position, where Justin Trudeau continues to say that the BDS movement is anti-Semitic. He is completely out of step with what the general Canadian population believes on that. So I think we're starting to see an awakening where people are starting to agree with human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, which both came out with reports this year saying that Israel is an apartheid state. And more Canadians are seeing that apartheid, and they're seeing these analyses, and they're hearing from Palestinians in the media, and they're wanting to do something about it. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that's where we start to see things beginning to shift. There was a really fascinating public opinion poll done in the United States earlier this year, where they found that 25% of American Jews actually agree that Israel is an apartheid state. So that's 1/4 of American Jews who now think Israel is apartheid, or Israel is an apartheid state. But at the same time, all of these like major pro-Israel or major Zionist organizations are saying that to call Israel an apartheid state, or to suggest that Israel is guilty of committing the crimes of apartheid, is anti-Semitism. And so we're seeing that incredible debate and that shift in opinion happen within Jewish communities. Unfortunately, we don't have data on Jewish communities in Canada, specifically with regards to the apartheid designation. But what we do know is that there was another public opinion poll done in 2018, and it found in Canada that 1/3 of Canadian Jews have a negative perception of the state of Israel. And so again, that's a consensus that has been shifting over decades, because if you go back a few decades, what you'll certainly see, this was something that was present in my own family and in many Jewish families, is there was an absolute consensus that we should support the state of Israel no matter what. And that's just an absolutely untenable position anymore. I mean, I think more and more Jews are looking at what's happening there and saying, this is very, very hard to reconcile with my own views. And frankly, it's hard to reconcile with a lot of Jewish thought and Jewish values, right? A lot of Jewish values are based on the notion of tikkun olam, which means to mend the world. And so, there's been a strong current in Judaism going back hundreds, if not thousands of years, to embody social justice and to fight for and to build a world where there is tolerance and equality. And these notions have to extend beyond just Jewish communities, right? Like when we fight racism and when we fight for equality, that can't just mean equality just for Jews. It has to extend to the whole human family, and certainly Palestinians as well too.
I want to end the show on a quote Dennis told me regarding Israel-Palestine and connecting it to other issues happening in the world.
Capitalism is not equipped to deal with a pandemic, a sanitary crisis. So there's the environment, there's the economy. Then there's, police brutality. We have our own, of course, there's George Floyd, we have Joyce Echaquan. So it's not solely a US thing. Racism, brutality, crowd control, and again, to connect this with Israel, a lot of these crowd control techniques are, tried and tested on Palestinians. Okay, what's the sales pitch? It's been for Israeli security systems. It's been battle tested or something like that. What does that mean? That means we tried it out on Palestinians and it worked. So it can work in your democracy, in your city, in your country. Police brutality, state repression. My heart goes out to your generation. But at the same time, these challenges they're just waiting for mobilization, action, organizing, strategizing, meeting, discussing, strategizing. You know how it works. So the problems are great, but the possibilities are even greater.
To keep up to date with the newest episodes, follow Local 514 on YouTube and follow CUTV on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for watching. See you next time.